Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and we got a great guest coming on today to talk about the upcoming Venus retrograde. We're entering into a very heavy retrograde period. Pluto went retrograde last week. Saturn's going to go retrograde in the 11th. Venus goes retrograde on the 13th, and Jupiter goes retrograde on the 14th, all within very close proximity. So we're going to have a lot of retrograde action. So we're going to be talking about that with my friend Arielle Guttman. She'll be on in a minute or two. Before we do that, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology, as well as the signs. And, of course, links to all of my podcasts and my television shows and my artwork, as well as a donate button, which is always convenient for those of you who feel you have to donate to me, which I would love anyway. So feel free to donate at your own will. Anyway, my guest today is Arielle Guttman. She's a wonderful astrologer. Probably best known for her book, Venus Star Rising. Her website is sophiavenus.com, S-O-P-H-I-A Venus.com. And we're going to be talking today, get the conversation started, talking about the Venus retrograde, which is coming up. So welcome to the show today, Arielle. It's always good to see you and have you on the show.
Thank you, Chris. I always love being with you and talking. We have great discussions.
We do. So, coming up, when we are entering in this heavy retrograde period, it's quite amazing. And I think it's, unusual to see, well, it's not unusual so much, but it's really sort of indicative of the times that we're living in, where this being in isolation for all of us has sort of forced us to reconsider, which I think is the big word for retrograde, is the prefix re. We have to reconsider our relationships, reevaluate our lives, reevaluate everything through a different lens now that we're looking at a different kind of lifestyle. And then we bring Venus into the picture, and you being the Venus person of the planet, what do you think of it all?
Well, one of many.
One of many, but still, you write the definitive book, and you sort of recast Venus in a different light, which is very, very useful for all of us.
Well, especially with the star points. I mean, that's the part of Venus that I introduced. There's a lot of fine people working with Venus material right now in other ways, but I think the star points have proven, I've been working with them since 2004, so 16 years now, and they've proven to really pack a pretty powerful statement in terms of changing my whole way of reading charts and, looking at the person from that perspective.
Interesting.
But you were talking about Of course, we always know that retrogrades involve some kind of With Mercury, it's always about communication and contracts and signing and travel and this and that. But with Venus, it's really affairs of the heart. It's how we feel about things, what we value, what we don't value, and how we're changing our values. And I think a good phrase for this Venus retrograde 2020 in Gemini is it's the big reset button, because we've already had the quarantine. Many states and countries are now coming out of quarantine, which I think is such a,
it's premature,
unusual time, because we got all these planets going retrograde right now.
Yeah.
And that would normally seem to say, okay, this is when you might go into quarantine instead of coming out of quarantine.
I know.
So I think the timing is really off here. But I think that we're going to, obviously, it's a great experiment, and we're going to see what happens and what we're going to learn from it. But I would call this a reset button. This is the reset button on what is going to be possible, what is possible, and what's going to be possible as we move further into the future.
Yeah. Everything that we know and sort of adhered to as normal, whether it be concerts, whether it be sporting events, everything has to be recast in a new light. And there's another re word right there, recasting. How do we go to restaurants? How do we go to movie theaters? How do we go to sporting events under this? Do we have to sit every other seat? I mean, we have no idea what that's going to look like, of course.
How do we fly?
How do we fly?
How do we get on an airplane? How do we get on a subway?
Right, exactly.
How do we go into an astrological conference in a large hotel where there's 50 or 60 people crowded into a small meeting room and 1,500 circulating around a banquet room? It's, I mean, I'm already missing some of the conferences that have been canceled, and the idea that more could be, because, webinars and getting on the computer and doing them, that's one way to learn for sure, but it's not the way, Venus is a social planet. Venus wants connection. Mm-hmm. Venus would go to a conference or even any kind of learning environment. And this is the whole Venus and Gemini, because it has to do with learning and education and whatnot. You go there not just to learn, but to connect.
Right. And you can't do that you can't do that in a virtual world. I think so much of learning, which you just, brought up, is the idea of, you may be sitting in a classroom or in a lecture or something like that, and you're absorbing the material, and then someone in the room asks a question that sort of tilts your whole head and your whole idea of this sort of situation in a different way. And it's because of that interaction of that person and the dialogue between the room and the dynamics of the room that make that whole conversation much more rich with meaning and context. And so we all miss that, and we can't get that. It's nice to be able, this is a good substitute, being able to see people. At least we can see people in their expressions. Thank God there's FaceTime. I understand that. But it doesn't supplant face-to-face contact.
Exactly. Now, it's possible that the younger group is much more into this, and I will say the group of people that have been born since 1964, because which they're already getting older, but to us they're younger.
Still younger. They're always younger.
I was 15 then, so I was already. The Beatles came to America that year, but that's the year the Gemini star point began, and this different kind of learning. And then we had the Venus retrograde transits over the face of the sun from 2004 to 2012, and then all kinds of learning and communication changed drastically with social media and smartphones and all this digital technology. So that group of people born from the mid to late 60s onward are actually much more geared. They're more wired for this kind of information to come through.
Of course, yeah.
Than maybe us who are older, not saying that we can't do it, but every time a new program or an application comes up, I have to sit with it for a while and say, do I really want to learn this? And then it's like, well, I really have no choice if I want to keep going in terms of, what I'm able to do in my business and in my webinars and things like that. I'm very grateful for applications like Skype and Zoom right now, and I'm glad that we had a lot of astrologers had a lot of practice with them before this all happened, because so many of our conferences are on this anyway. Mm-hmm. And as you and I have mentioned, our life hasn't really changed that much since the quarantine, because we're still on Zoom and Skype every day with people, and many hours a day from our homes, from our offices, wherever they be. And usually home offices for astrologers for the most part. But it does, even though my personal life hasn't changed that much, I still miss the weekend contact, the going out, the being with friends, I'm doing walking with 6 feet apart with friends, on certain trails, and trying to maintain the distance. But it still feels weird when we're outside right now, just like everybody is, Do you have a mask? Don't you have a mask?
It's
And
very
I
scary.
think,
It really is. It's not human. It's not human. It's not like us to live like this, and that's why it feels so awkward because we are social creatures. We want to have contact. This is how we thrive. We thrive on physical contact and expressing our emotions and hugging and kissing and shaking hands, and all those things are taboo now. And it does make you wonder if they'll ever come back. And is this a signal towards a much different time as we see Saturn eventually moving back into Aquarius and eventually joined by Jupiter? I think of the sort of the Aquarian kind of lifestyle has always been to me much more of a larger collective lifestyle and sort of has a certain chilliness to it because it's sort of restricted and a little bit colder and removed. It's a little more severe, I guess. So it's not quite that warmth that you might find if Saturn were going into some other planet, some other sign. So I think in that placement, it's going to bring those issues to light and force us to live differently. But you have to think of things. Will we be walking around with face masks every time we go to the store from now on? Will we be able to go back to restaurants? Will we? I've got a son that's a chef, and I'm worried to death he's not going to get a job again. I mean, where does this stuff happen? I mean, it's very disconcerting, I would say, and unnatural.
exactly. I think the biggest thing with this Gemini retrograde, which, by the way, goes from May 12th to June 25th, it's really about a 42-day period, but one day is a station on one end and one day is a station on the other end, or two. I usually call it approximately a 40-day period
Right.
of withdrawal somehow in Venusian-related matters. And it's interesting to me, I've had so many people in my circle that didn't even know exactly when the Venus retrograde was or about that 40-day thing tell me that they're implementing a 40-day practice of something. And I know this 40-day practice comes from a lot of the ancient religions, and I've made the point, ancient and modern religions, but they started, a long time ago. And I've made the point that I think a lot of these 40-day practices and religions have to do with the Venus retrograde, because that is the time when it's withdrawing and turning more inward rather than serving everybody outward. Venus, the social planet, the relationship planet, is a lot when she's acting normally and direct and whatnot. It's like, she's there for you. What can I do for you? Let's connect. Let's do this. I'll be there. What time? Just tell me. Okay. Well, now Venus retrograde, it's like, no, I can't be there now. I'm taking care of myself. I'm doing something else. I can't meet you normally when I do because I'm doing this 40-day practice at this point. So I was thinking about this early in the year when I was writing the forecasts for the Venus Gemini retrograde, and I thought, I think a lot of people are going to be writing, doing stories, and they already are. I mean, there's going to be a million stories coming out of this, I'm sure. But I also felt that this Venus Gemini time, at least for me, one thing that I've considered is pulling back from media, either completely for the 40 days or significantly.
I like that idea.
Because I think it is just making people crazy. If you follow the news thread, the 24-hour news cycle every single day, even if you look at it only 10 minutes a day, it's so disturbing to the psyche.
It's jarring, and it's important to be informed. I would agree with that. I think it's important to be informed, but there comes a point in time where the news cycle, I think particularly in the United States and perhaps even in the West, has become very sensationalized to the point where it's always a breaking news, breaking story, and it's always this sense of urgency. And I don't know if that's truly the case. I think the idea is great. I've stopped watching. I used to watch the news at lunchtime. I just stopped altogether about a month ago. I said I can't watch this anymore. I got a chuckle, not a chuckle, but I was encouraged by watching Governor Cuomo out of New York because he was very inspirational and he provided a sense of sanity and stability to a fraught society that we weren't getting anywhere else. So I was enjoying that.
He and Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, they're both
in California.
Yep, both of them.
New York and California. Hey, rock on.
No kidding.
You two states are leading the way in what's right in the new era.
And it's East Coast, West Coast. There's no question about it. But I stopped. I just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, it got to be repetitive as well. I think that and of course the false narrative, and I don't like seeing, it's easy to be disturbed when you see people walking around carrying guns and Confederate flags and stuff like that. It just seems such an unusual collaboration of misjointed ideas that just don't even jive. If they're saying, I've seen people saying we're the followers of Lincoln, and they're carrying Confederate flags, it's just completely antithetical to what is real. It's just an aberration of the whole thing. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, and a point has been made by many people that if minorities had stormed the state capitol carrying guns,
they'd be dead.
I mean, they would be. Yeah, they'd be buried by now.
Yeah,
they'd be, and so that's the thing. There's the information. This is about Gemini, okay, and the Venus, and there's a lot of planets actually in Gemini for this Venus retrograde period. There's a couple of asteroids that are very important to the timeline, and the nodes are just coming into Gemini for this Venus retrograde. Also, in fact, tomorrow or the next, sometime early May this week, we go from 18 or 19 months in Cancer with the North Node to Gemini. And so it's very interesting because the whole Gemini retrograde period of Venus lasts about 18 or 19 months. And it's starting at the same time that the nodal cycle in Gemini begins for 18 or 19 months. So we're going to have an overlap for the whole time.
Which seems very apropos. It seems very apropos. I mean, that's why astrology is so vital and so accurate, because we see these things, these are not made up things. They are hitting right on the market. When they come that close in time with that amount of accuracy, you have to just adhere to it.
And so one of the things is that the information comes in so fast and it goes out so fast. It's retweeted in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
You don't really have a chance to think about it. Or even try to understand it more deeply. You just get the message and you send it back out. And I've been saying this for a little while too, there's an epidemic or pandemic really around us right now of misinformation. We can't really trust all our sources anymore. And even the sources that we thought we could trust, I'm trying to see this very objectively, that it's so polarized. It's one side or the other. These people are right, these people are not. And flip, polarity, duality. We have to somehow rise above this. And the thing that's being made worse by this in the Gemini retrograde is both Mars in Pisces and Neptune in Pisces are squaring. The retrograde point of Venus is 21 Gemini square Neptune.
20, yep.
And the star point is 13 Gemini square Mars in Pisces, applying to Neptune in Pisces. So it's really a lot about belief versus information.
And Venus and Neptune will go retrograde later in June. And Neptune in Pisces really, I think, casts that veil of obfuscation, sort of that cloud of misinformation, which is the right word. We don't know who to believe. And I think you're right. Even news sources that bill themselves as being balanced, you can hear even a subtle bias there because it's so difficult. But I've mentioned this before on my radio shows with other guests. It's that I don't try to be political, but when I talk about political commentary or make political statements, it is based in the astrology, and the astrology is accurate for the time that we're living in. So I may make some comment about so-and-so, but it's exactly accurate because we've got Neptune in Pisces casting this veil. Things are not clear. We're not reporting a political bias so much as we are reporting what the stars and the planets are telling us.
Right. And the reporters are much more emotional now in their delivery of whatever, because it's based on their feelings and how they're reacting to what's happening. You don't get this just even somebody reporting the news. They're not just reporting the news, they're trying to interpret the news, and they're trying to sway you emotionally one way or the other.
Right.
There's an underlying current underneath, and it depends on which channel you watch, but you know the channels. We all know the channels. And it's like one side is very this way and the other side is very that way, and they're going to try to get you into their way of thinking no matter what. So I think it just, with our own minds, our own free will, our own thoughts, let's try to be open-minded about everything, but at the same time, not go down this path of just believing everything you hear just because you think somebody you trust has said it or told you.
Yeah.
Because things keep changing so fast.
Where's Walter?
Now.
Where's Walter Cronkite when we need him? That's what we need. But the thing
I
is,
don't think he was made for these times.
Oh no, I know. But the problem with this too is that it is easy to manipulate data now. That's what's concerning to me. It's easy to manipulate data. It's easy to change images. It's easy to change video. It's easy to put things, all because of the digital technology. So being able to discern what is right and what is wrong is very difficult. And then you've got this person bashing the press. So that raises people's ire and makes the press defensive in some ways, wanting to say, listen, we're trying to report this accurately. I love the fact that the Washington Post has across its banner says democracy dies in darkness. And if we are in an era of darkness where they ban people from coming to the press conferences or getting information out properly, then they can always be manipulated. This is the real concern. So.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Very difficult.
So there's a lot of industries, as you mentioned earlier, being affected by this Gemini retrograde, that this is where the reset button comes in and where these corporate entities or industries as a whole are going to have to figure out what do we do next. Because we have travel. There's no question that the airline industry and the petroleum industry that fuels all our vehicles is going through massive reorganization at the moment, right?
Yep.
Education, schools, both lower and higher forms of instruction are rethinking at the moment and retooling their learning environments to provide safety. Record numbers of people are not enrolling in college for this coming fall semester, and record numbers of drops in attendance for all across the board are happening. So this is going to affect education in a major way. Then there's beliefs. Sagittarius is the polarity to Gemini and the VSP that we're coming into. What do we believe? What did we believe yesterday? What do we believe today? What do we believe tomorrow? And what we just talked about. Can we believe what we actually are hearing?
Exactly. And of course, Sagittarius also speaks to organized religion, and people can't go to organized religion anymore. They have got to, you've got to dial into your local church, and that's not the same. That's not the same experience at all for people of that.
Exactly. But the, so beliefs are going to be, and the thing about it is right after the Venus star point, which comes right in the middle of the retrograde, like halfway through, 20 days or so into it, we get on June 3rd, we get the 13-degree Gemini star point. 2 days later, we get a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. So that in itself says this is a dramatic period with those two events happening kind of at the same time. So it is going to bring us up in a really big way.
We're sort of recasting. There goes that word again. We're sort of recasting how we exist and coexist as humans in a world that has sort of spun out of control. Perhaps maybe evolved too quickly, like you could say. Maybe the rate of progress has been too accelerated, and we've gone so far ahead that we almost needed this pause. Because you look at what it's done to the environment. You mentioned oil. Oil is very Capricornian, because it comes from the ground and is very earth-oriented. And, we have all of these problems with that, and it's going to change those industries to the point where they may never be the same, and we may have to rethink how we do all that. I can't imagine. America's a very much of a sports-inclined society. And if you have all these major league teams.
Well, the world is too.
Of course,
the World Cup,
the Olympics
football,
are not happening. Yeah.
All over. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And tennis, and And no tournaments everywhere. No, the world sports is. I mean, It's been one really good Mars outlet for people to constructively use Mars. In sports and competition and whatnot. Even the Olympics. They canceled the Olympics this summer.
And the World Cup and the Euro Cup is canceled. I believe. I mean, there's no baseball season. There's no all kinds
exactly.
of
So it's changing life in a very big way. And will we go back to what will be the new normal? I mean, that's going to be the question. That's why I think this is the big reset button right now.
It is a reset, yeah. I think it's going to be a much more a stoic and stolid kind of environment. I don't think it's going to be as warm and embracing, not that it was to begin with, but I think when Saturn and Jupiter get into Aquarius, as I mentioned, I think it's going to cast a level of sort of how do we handle this problem responsibly as a collective? This is how we have to do this. This is how we solve the problems that we have to do as a collective. We're all in this together. That's the one thing that we can all unite to. And I think it's going to be a very different, and it may be quite some time, and we may look back nostalgically. Remember the good old 2020s or the 2019 when we could go out and have a dinner together, in a meal in a restaurant, and that may not be the same either. I mean, it's hard to believe. Really hard to believe.
Right. It is. Back to your Aquarius point, what I was thinking about that, because there's a cool, detached, sometimes even icy side to Aquarius, and it is, in the old system, it is Saturn ruled. It is a Saturn ruled sign, even though modern astrologers like to give it to Aquarius and think it's all liberated and wonderful and free and all that, which there's a part of it that's that too. But I think I've always looked at Capricorn as our executive branch of government,
right,
and Aquarius more as the legislative branch of government, like the Senate and the Congress. And so I think with the new conjunction going into Aquarius, that possibly there's going to be a trend shifting in the next 20 years to give the legislative branch a little bit more weight, a little bit more, because right now I feel like the executive branch is almost taking power to an absolute.
Oh, of course it is, yeah.
So Sagittarius is like the judicial branch, right? The high courts. Capricorn is the executive branch, and then we've got the legislative branch in Aquarius. So I think it'll get maybe a little warmer when Jupiter goes into Pisces finally.
Right, exactly.
But
that's a year away though, at least.
Yeah, it's a year. It's more than a year away. But hey, nothing's moving fast right now. Everybody wants things. We're a society of fast food.
Right.
I want it now.
Well,
things are not moving fast.
Your point about the legislative is a good thing to latch onto, because of the fact that if the administration were to change, and some Supreme Court justices were to be appointed by, say, the Democrats, we would see definitely a different kind of person in there. We might even see someone like a Barack Obama get nominated to the Supreme Court. We could see a Michelle Obama. Any number of these people could be, and they would be the right person. He's got an Aquarius moon, I believe, Barack Obama, so that he would have that sort of
Gemini moon. He's a Gemini moon, but he's Aquarius rising.
Aquarius rising, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he has that, and he has a very sort of cool demeanor to him. He's very articulate and very sort of professorial.
Exactly.
And that's the kind of person you'd want to be in the Supreme Court. And that might be a way that is shifted in a responsible way, which would be a nice outcome, I think. So that would be nice to see that.
It would be. It would be.
We're speaking today with Arielle Guttman on Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. We're going to take a quick break here. While we're on break, I encourage you to go to Arielle's website, Sophia Venus, SOPHIA Venus.com, one long word. And her book that she's best known for, I think, is The Venus Star Rising. She's written other books as well, but The Venus Star Rising is really relevant for our times. It's sort of a whole new lens and filter through which to interpret astrology. Very helpful to know your Venus star points, because they are sort of triggering dates in your life, and we can talk about that perhaps when we get back. But we'll take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, but in the meantime, check out her website, sophiavenus.com. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. My guest today is Arielle Guttman. She is the author of Venus Star Rising, and her website is sophiavenus.com, S-O-P-H-I-A, Venus.com, all one long word. And we're talking about she's known for sort of this whole new lens of discovery of interpretation of Venus, and it's through the star points, which is when we have the sun and the Venus align at certain points in the 5 points around the zodiacal wheel. And it's good. Everybody has their own Venus star points, just like we have our own rising signs and moons and stuff like that. So it's important to know where they are, because they can be significant indicators of a time that you're going through. And how would someone best use them? If they knew their Venus star points and they were having a Venus conjunction at a star point, or even a major transit at a star point, how would that manifest? Would it be what would be the best way to describe that, do you think?
It's usually a wonderful event when you're getting a transit to either your own star point or the transiting star of Venus is activating one of your planets. Now, of course, there's light and shadow. There's, two ways to look at everything in astrology. Yeah. Venus, we tend to think, is all beauty and love and light, and the sun, but there's a darker side to everything. Let's say the Venus star point at 13 Gemini right now is transiting your natal Saturn.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it could be a time of, much more extra responsibility. I mean, however Saturn figures into your chart, but it could be a lot of extra responsibility and more, let's say, more parenting or more jobs, more obligations, more, it could have to do with your physical health and the need to take care of it better and make sure you're strong and able. But let's say that same 13 Gemini Venus star point is transiting your sun, for instance, or even your ascendant or something. That's usually bringing you into the light in some way. the sun especially. I've noticed the Venus star transits over people's sun to be an 8-year period that for them feels like, oh, that was the time of my life. That
Yeah.
was really cool. I was really feeling like, things were working, like you're in the light, the sun.
Mm-hmm.
You're being seen, you're being heard, you're being followed on, social media or whatever it is you're doing. It's like you're really out there in a
You
very
have the world's
prominent way.
attention. Yeah, you have the world's attention.
You're popular.
Popular, yeah.
Okay, and who doesn't like that? Okay, so then let's say Venus star point is on your moon. That can be, depending on the condition of your moon, of course, but that can be a time when you're dealing with more domestic types of things.
Familial, yep.
Your home, your family. You might be having a bunch of grandbabies. you might be having, you might even be having babies. You might be adding somehow more property or land, or changing something around
Or
your
perhaps
house.
an elderly relative moves in with you if you're in that age bracket. You could be in that same. Something about your domestic scene is
Domestic scene, and a parent can often pass during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's lunar kind of related things. And I'm just using the most broad and simplistic terms right now.
That's
to
the right way to do it,
underscore when we're doing these things kind of this way without looking at the actual chart and how it's connected. This is the way you would do it. But yeah, so I say to the audience, yeah, everybody look at the area around 13 Gemini, and then 13 mutable, and then 13 of anything, because this star point's going to activate 13 of everything in some particular way.
Yeah, right.
And then I would say, look at the whole region from 21 Gemini all the way down to 5 Gemini, because if you have any planets in that space, either in Gemini or in Sagittarius, the sign of cross, which I think works really well.
Yeah, it does.
Then you're looking at, okay, what this retrograde period is really visiting you close to home. Mm-hmm. It's really activating something.
And the same is true for the squares to that. So you'd have the Virgo points and the Pisces points as well. And of course, now we have, you mentioned 20 degrees. We've got Neptune at 20 degrees right now, and it's going to be going retrograde. So it's going to fall into that same spectrum of degrees, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, Venus square Neptune is, I think we can say it's basically somebody who has a dream. I have a dream. I have an ideal. I have a romantic ideal. I have a fantasy. I have a vision I want to fulfill. I think this square is not going to, I'd say don't abandon the dream entirely, but it's possibly going to have to be, as you say, recast. It may be delayed. It may
require more discernment.
And you may have to tweak it a little, just because I think it's like in our whole collective experience right now, I think everybody's having to rethink, I feel sorry. I'm of an age where I've lived a lot of years and I've had so many great experiences in my life that have not been denied by a situation like this. But I think of the kids these days who are just ready to graduate high school
or college,
or entering college, or graduating or whatever.
Yeah.
And their whole life, and this is the Gemini group because it rules youth. It rules, I would say, the age between about, let's say, puberty to young adult. Like the teens into the early 20s. Sort
of like the first Jupiter return, probably to like the Saturn return.
Yeah.
12 to 28, something like that.
These people, these kids, I can just see like, wow, their life is their dreams, their hopes. I heard from a client the other day who's has a member of her family that was competing for a very prestigious. It was a competition in a musical thing. Okay, like in a classical music thing, and they were going to be this summer. They were all going to be meeting, and there was this thing going on, and of course that's all canceled, and they can't do it anymore, and all these things, and of course her daughter's was crushed, realizing that it's like they can't move forward with their life right now. And I just want to say to people like that okay, that's just. I really believe this is just temporary. Mm-hmm. I think we are going to come out of this, but we really have to deal with some really important issues and situations that actually, I think there's a lot of silver linings coming out of this pandemic that we hadn't realized were going to be so crystal clear.
Oh, I agree.
Things like the environment.
Yeah.
For instance.
The environment's a perfect example. Now we've got this classic experiment, which you could never replicate otherwise. We couldn't bring all the planes down to the ground and get all the cars off the highway unless we had something like this. And now that that's happened, we can see the sky and the environment clearly and say, wow, this is what it takes. Maybe this will push green technology. But and also, and one of the things about, and I feel bad about the same generation you did, sort of that the 12 to 28 year range. But ironically, they are better equipped now because they've got their phones and they've got their social media savvy and all that, so they can sort of continue in some capacity, which if it happened to us in our generation under the same circumstances, would have been much different for us because we didn't have cell phones. We would have been mailing letters back and forth and having phone calls at night or whatever. So at least they have that advantage, but it is a disappointment to them to be at this period of time in their life and have that. But it does raise the idea of what has to happen. How do we correct these problems? And this is this generation's sort of mantle that they've got to carry.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking, that that we will go on with life, but in a different way. And I think the environmental things that have come out of this have been really incredible. I've been promoting the chart and the work of Greta Thunberg for quite a while now. Last year I was talking about her a lot in my webinars and things, and she's a really heavy-duty Capricorn. She has a lot of this Capricorn stuff in her chart that's being hit right now, and also a lot of Scorpio, and a Venus star point in Scorpio. And she is here to change the world. She is here to at least influence the world, if not change it single-handedly. And she, I think of everything she said last year that just really ticked off a lot of people about don't fly so much, you're polluting the air and all these things. And people were going, what? I'm not going to stop flying. But these things are all happening now. And I look out, we have always had pretty great skies actually in Santa Fe. But the skies, when I go out on my walks now, they're even better than they were before. I thought they were great before, but they're even better now.
And there's no airplanes clogging the space up. It's just remarkable what it's done. So this is a real visceral experiment, as sort of a nature's way of saying this is what you have to solve. And this generation will adapt, and we will. And humankind has always adapted to these sort of crises, and we will adapt. I listened to a podcast this morning that's saying that, when this is all over and said and done, if you look back and historically look at the pandemic of 1918, well, what followed it was the Roaring '20s. So people do come out of their shells eventually. We do come back out and we do reform our lives, and it'll be different, but it'll probably be we will learn something, I think, collectively from the environmental impact this has had on us. We will learn that this is for real. This is a very real wake-up call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other thing about that is that when you mentioned the last one, the 1918 one, and then followed by the Roaring '20s, really right now, before we've even reached the peak of the curve, all these states want to open, countries are starting to open, but especially in the United States, when we haven't even reached the peak yet.
I know.
And everybody is clamoring to come out and protesting all over the place. Well, I noticed the whole week that these protests were going on, Uranus is in Taurus. First comes along Mercury to conjunct Uranus,
yep.
And then the Sun comes along, and we've had a triple conjunction with Mercury and Sun and Uranus. And this is what Uranus does.
That's right.
This is the break me out, get me out of here. Literally break me out of this cage,
Yep.
and if you don't, I'm going to bring my gun and I'm going to shoot a hole through the door and get out myself.
It's very true, and it's very appropriate. But at the same time we had this Saturn squaring to Uranus, which is sort of, the authority coming down and saying, no, you can't go out, like Governor Whitmer of Michigan saying, no, I'm going to impose this even longer because that's the right thing to do. This is like your mother. This is like, Saturn always reminds me of your mother telling you to clean up your room on a Saturday morning when you want to go out and play. And all your friends are outside playing, you got to clean your room, and you get mad because you got to clean your room. But when you clean your room and then you go out to play, you feel better. This is a very similar sort of situation. We have to be responsible about this. And I think that the retrograde period, I think, is really indicative of this sort of slow walking backwards of these planets as they all collectively go retrograde to a period of time when they all come back direct again, which is going to be very close to what it was like back in early January when we had the conjunction, which would be September-October period when we would see, when the doctor's already talking about this being a recurrence of this, or we're going to hit a breaking point where you hit the breaking point and the curve just goes wild, and that's what.
And that's when Mars is going retrograde this fall, and everything. It is. We're in a state of pandemonium right now. It's pandemic. The root word of pandemonium, is Pan, the god Pan.
Right.
And from the Greek myth of Pan, and he scared people. I mean, he frightened people just with his looks and his way and his devilish kind of activities and actions, and so he frightened people. And Pandora is another one that has that same root. And Pandora, if you remember the myth about Pandora's box,
yes, of course.
Zeus sent, the box, but the admonition was, do not open the box. Well, of course, she opened the box. And, of course, out came all of the ills of the world, everything conceivable. But the last thing left was hope. And that's what we have. It's like this pandemic has unleashed a lot of things.
It has.
And pandemonium and panic,
exactly.
but hope.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, it's true. And the other thing that's interesting about this is often referred to as an apocalyptic kind of moment. And I believe it's the Greek root. You'd probably know this better than I. The word apocalypse is actually the unveiling. And this is really an unveiling of our weak points. This is where the chain breaks, because we see that what we've unveiled here is, look at, now as a result of unveiling this, we see what the highways look like in Los Angeles, and the air is clear. People can now see the Himalayas in India. They couldn't see them before. Rivers and water, all of these things are now being unveiled as, look, this is what we should be doing. This is sort of an apocalyptic period, yes, but that does mean the unveiling is the word.
The beautiful canals in Venice.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, this is what the world should look like. And this is, I'm hoping, in the beginning of the year forecast I did, with my colleague Alexandra, we talked about the mid to late 20s and how we were going to really be shifting from a major emphasis in earth to air. I mean, we're already starting it this year a little bit with Saturn moving into air and Jupiter later in the year, and that 20-year conjunction of them. But that syzygy, as they call it, the grand mutation, we're shifting into air, is going to be going for the next 200 years. So I wanted to talk just about the 2020s, though. We have many planets moving into air signs and air themes continuing through the 2020s.
We do.
And it's about the middle part. It's about 24 to 26 where things really get ramped up. And I think that the clean air technologies and, it's like, the problems are now, but we're not ready for them. Even though the ideas have been in place for a long time, we're not ready. But maybe by the mid-20s and late 20s, there's people already now getting to work on, okay, we gotta move this onto the fast track. We got to get things going because this is where we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, green technologies in general are very hot topics, and they're so logical because the dynamics of the numbers that come with it, the amount of jobs that could be created by making green jobs, building new buildings that are environmentally friendly, building highways, building jets, building cars, building solar panels, are enormously huge growth. And yet, to go back to coal and oil when other technologies are right within our reach seems really backwards. And this may be that awakening of the time that's saying this is oil. This may be the end of oil as we know it. Oil as we know it. I mean, I don't know where you are.
It agrees with my calculations on the Venus star, the historical transit of the star, because the petroleum industry really got going in the 1920s when the Scorpio star came in. Each star point through a sign runs for approximately 100 years. And it's in the 2020s that we get also the grand shift out of Scorpio, a petroleum-based sign, into Libra, a cleaner air-based sign. And so I think petroleum, I hope I'm right. I think that by the end of the 20s, when we actually finish the whole Scorpio cycle, because we have 2022, we have the first Libra star. 4 years later, in 26, we have the last Scorpio star.
Okay, right.
And then by 2030, it sort of moves back and forth like the nodes do a little bit, right. That wobble.
Yep.
And then by 2030, we will be into Libra to stay for 100 years. And so I'm thinking of that period in the mid-20s as being another mutation on the star where it's no longer what people want anymore, to have the dirty kinds of petroleum, coal, the things you mentioned, but that we're going to want a world with clean air and breathable air. This is going to be a major component of this air mutation that we're going into.
And I think we're getting that reminder by having to walk around with these masks on, because nobody likes to wear a mask. You can't see people smiling, you can't talk to people. And so this mask
makes you very fearful.
Yeah, it's sort of a blunt reminder of what it's like when you have got clean air. It's sort of a very visceral, let's put a mask on you because the air is so bad. You say, I don't like this mask on me right now. Let's take the mask off and let's get the technology back. So it really is a very supportive kind of action in an odd sort of way, if you see my point there. Having us wear masks means we don't like the mask, so how do we respond to that? Well, we clean the air up.
Right. I was joking with some astrology colleagues that I meet with on a regular basis now. We have a once a week meeting and we talk about things happening and how we're doing. And one of them is making masks. And she showed us some beautiful masks that she'd made. And I've gotten a few that people have made. And I said, it's funny, for the Scorpio star point, the waning years of the Scorpio star point era.
Secrecy.
Well, that too, the masked face, but I never thought of designer masks as one of the fashion statements that was going to be coming through. I thought, I put in leather jackets and all of those kind of things, but designer masks hadn't occurred to me at the time, but here we are.
There's something secretive about that, so it really is very Scorpio. It's very Scorpionic. I mean, it has that.
Very.
If you're you're like the masked bandit. You got you can't see what's going on.
Exactly.
You can't see expression.
We're all the Lone Ranger now.
You can't see the expression, right? You can't see the expression. Right. You can't see nuance. You have to talk through a veil. To me, that's very Scorpionic. That's very secretive in that way. I think.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So. Anyway, I wanted to just say for the audience that the last Venus retrograde was October, November of 2018 in Scorpio. And the next one, after this one coming up, will not be until January of 2022. So they happen about once every year and a half, or to be more specific, 1.6 years. And retrograde Venuses are always times when Venus is ending her 584-day synodic cycle, mm-hmm. and then beginning a new one. And she kind of loops. The way retrogrades work is not exactly walking backwards. It appears to be moving backwards in a straight line, but it's not a straight line.
Right.
When she's retrograde, she dances way off the ecliptic and doesn't necessarily follow the path. Even going straight backwards, she doesn't do. She's whirling and twirling, and I think Mercury's the same. And some of the retrogrades do this. They have this sort of dance, or they're doing their own thing. They're
Well, it's
very
like a ratchet. It's a ratchet. It has a sense of
off.
cyclical nature. Yeah, it's very off. You're right. And it goes back.
They're off the beaten path.
Right, which is a good way of and a good analogy for the time, I think, as well. The thing about the Venus retrograde in Gemini, it really, I think, it also speaks to the recurrent, not the recurrence, but the sort of the rising of distance learning, because in Gemini it's all about learning and the curiosity factor. And you mentioned earlier, the colleges not getting people coming back. Maybe the new model will actually be distance learning. Much as I don't like that, I mean, I could see that being even a temporary thing for this period of time, because people, like you said, we have to do Zoom and Skype meetings in order to get together with people, and that may be the way it goes with classes and stuff as well. I could see
Exactly. Exactly. So everything, not everything, but a lot of things are changing, and even the transportation of our the supply lines, the food chain,
Very scary.
I mean, that's the thing. When people started hoarding paper products, I was like, what? And that was like early on. And I thought, what is this? What do they think this is? Or what is it that I don't know it is? Because that's the last thing I would have thought of hoarding. I would have thought, well, I want to make sure I can still get fresh food and water.
Yeah, I would do that first too. But and it's also the idea the supply chain is a very complex sort of a mechanism, and it's so complicated. They've refined it so distinctly and so crisply that they can to tell when things are going to be arriving. It's just all based on timing. Well, then you close all the restaurants in the country, or at least for to-go food, and you reduce all the hotels. All of a sudden, all that food that is being created to meet that demand is now drastically reduced, and they've got surplus, and they're throwing food away because they have no place to put it, and it's just unusual. So the whole supply chain has to be reset, recalibrated to fit this new sort of paradigm that we're in.
Exactly. So what I'll say to the young people is try to keep up with your education, because we're going to need good minds figuring out these problems. We are in a great reset of the world, and we're going to need people figuring out how to do programming at a very sophisticated level, and how to make the changes, the readjustments that we're going to need, and figure, and to just really figure things out.
But you can see how that Venus in Gemini sort of, that ninth house sort of, characteristic, I could see it very clearly. The parallels between the third and the ninth house of education and communication being redefined, I guess, at a time like this.
Yeah, I think that's the big one for this, definitely.
Yeah, being redefined.
And there was one more point about the Venus retrograde. Let's see if I got them all. Well, two things, because beliefs, I think, are more the Pisces and the Sagittarius that we
realm.
have interacting. But we also have words, which are Gemini. And I think we do have to be really careful with our words right now, because new words, new phrases are coming up daily. They have a way of going viral. But I was thinking about our twin Gemini kings of the world right now.
Yeah.
In the UK, the Prime Minister, and the US, the President, are both Gemini suns. The UK one is also Gemini star point. He was born on very close to the day of the star. So these are our twin Gemini kings. I call Gemini the twin or the sibling constellation. And so they're sort of like the brothers here, the duo. But I was
a lot of parallels
thinking,
there.
I know there's a lot of parallels, and I was thinking how interesting this is, that they're kind of playing out this during this, very incredible Gemini phase relationship we're in. But I also call Gemini the sibling constellation, and it makes me think, who are our mates at this time? more than anything, Venus is wanting us to relate like we're kin with everyone, with those close to us right now, whether you're blood tie or not. The soul brother or the soul sister comes from the longing to establish a relationship based on conversation and exchange of ideas, but not idle conversation. Venus retrograde advises let's avoid non-significant and meaningless things to fill up the air or to fill up our minds with, and focus on the more important issues. Or, even better, not focus on anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
How many people that are in isolation now are taking the time to really do an internal practice, to really go inward and to really just, that's the idea of tuning out. You know, you still, like you said, you want to be informed. You don't want to be, completely out of the loop, but you don't want your head being filled with so much external noise that you're not reaching a place inside of yourself, a very deep place inside of yourself, mm-hmm. that is able to calm and center and give self-assurance. Because I don't think anyone on the outside can do that. I think it's like it has to come from within.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned that got me thinking when you said words and the way we communicate, because this is a Gemini period we're talking about, is the way language has been changed as a result of text messaging and how people communicate through that medium, and how words get truncated and they just come down to, I can't always understand the abbreviations that I see on Facebook, and I don't always know what does this mean. Like IDK means I don't know. I realize that eventually, but we have a lot of these words.
I know. That, the shortest form possible with Gemini.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, really, no, Gemini, actually, quick. If you have a lot of Gemini, they can go on and on and on and on and on with the story. But in this text thing and Twitter, which are such Gemini things, they're handheld, their fingers, they're short. They're crisp, short and quick and to the point. You're right.
And they're very
it's
damaging.
Like a whole new language.
And you can lob you can throw something out there that's very dismissive or derogatory of somebody, and it's out there and it has a life of its own and it goes viral by itself, and then you have to try to reel it back in if you felt you did something wrong. But it's already out there. Once it's out there, it's out there. The cat's out of the bag, and it's just a whole new definition of language in general. Because when you see the younger generations in a room, like a high school cafeteria, and they're texting to each other across the table rather than speaking to each other in person, they must be saying something secretive about somebody who they don't like the way their hair looks, or did you see the way she looked at me, or whatever. Like, sort of this little pettiness. And this rapid fire exchange is a very Gemini quality. It's just very quick turnaround.
Exactly. So yeah. So it's words, it's connecting with people in a closer way, right. That people that you really value. Mm-hmm. That's the thing with Venus. What do we really value? Yeah. And what do we really value in terms of the information we're bringing in, the people we're bringing in, the environmental things that we're bringing in? Let's just take a look at all of that. And,
give it a good.
But listen, 20. I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, we're almost out. Yeah, we're all done. It's okay. But if you have got something that you can close out with, it'd be great. Just some sort of idea, summation. I think we are in line with what we're talking about with regard to going into the 2020s and beyond. This very air-oriented time, which is, a very sort of, like you mentioned. And I like the fact that it's in Libra, because Libra is the sign of balance, and it maybe brings some equality back into our lives that we're sorely lacking right now.
Right, exactly. And the one final thing I was going to end on was that, and it's a little bit tied into the Venus retrograde because of the lunar eclipse that happens right there at the star point. That lunar eclipse on June 5th is happening right across the ascendant-descendant axis of the United States chart.
Oh, that's significant.
The one on June 21st at 0 Cancer is happening right on the Venus-Jupiter conjunction of the U.S., which, of course, has a lot to do with the economy and wealth and all that, and housing, Cancer. The July 4th eclipse at 12 Capricorn, lunar, happens right on the U.S. sun at the same degree of Cancer across the way. And the ones in the fall, the one right after the supposed election, if we're actually going to be having an election as scheduled, on November 30th, is at 8 degrees. It's a lunar again. It's 8 Sag Gemini, conjunct the U.S. Uranus.
Yeah, revolution.
Pandemonium and revolution. And then we've got December 14th, a solar ending the year at 23 Sagittarius, right on the opposite the U.S. Mars, so at 21 Gemini. We've had 6 eclipses this year in 2020. That in itself is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a time of great turbulence and change, and I think we have to embrace the change and forge ourselves going forward in an optimistic and meaningful manner, as opposed to falling back to the old. You know, the phrase that always got under my skin, and I'm not going to go on about this, is "Make America Great Again," as if it wasn't great already. And you can't ever go back. We know that as astrologers. Time goes a continuum. It goes on and on and on. We don't go backwards. We don't want to go backwards to coal. We want to go forwards to solar. We don't want to go backwards to oil. We want to go forwards to, battery chargers or whatever. We want to find a new way forward. And that's really the takeaway. So really important to remember those sort of things. But anyway, we have run out of time, Arielle, and I do appreciate you coming on. I knew that you'd be the right person to speak with when it came to Venus, and I love your insights and your ideas, and really great. Again, my guest today has been Arielle Guttman. Her website is Sophia Venus, SOPHIA VENUS, Venus, SophiaVenus.com. She's the author of Venus Star Rising, which you can get from her website or other book outlets, perhaps, if they're there. But I prefer you to go there rather than give it the money to the big man, if it's possible, because she won't get quite as much cha-ching. So anyway, and follow her around. She's a great speaker and wonderful guest at the astrology shows. And I think once you figure out the Venus star point and really understand it, those of you who are astrologers and practice astrology will really be in tune with it and inclined to see the value of it. It's very, very rich in symbolism and accuracy, most importantly. So, Arielle, thank you so much for coming on today. It's always great to talk to you.
Wow, Chris, thank you for such kind words and so many great things. Thank you so much. And I always enjoy being here. And we have great discussions.
We certainly
You have
do.
Great ideas. I love bouncing them back and forth with you.
It's fun, I know. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and be well and stay inside, whatever you have to do. You know the routine. So.
Yeah, stay safe, everybody.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.